Okay, so I am currently reading 2 books. I am about 100 pages into the book The Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence, and on audio I'm listening to The Lessons Never Learned by Rob Hayes. So a bit about the book The Wouldn't Burn. This is a dual POV high fantasy book following a girl called, I think it's Levira. And this girl lives out in a settlement in the desert called The Dust. That is until her village is attacked by Sabbers. This is the downside to reading fancies. You never know if you're pronouncing things right. S-A-B-B-E-R, Saber. Saber? I want to say Saber, but I feel like that would be a different spelling. S-A-B-R-E maybe. Anyway, the village is attacked by these creatures, and then she is whisked off away from her small town settlement in the middle of the desert on an adventure. And the other POV is Evar. Now, while Levira's setup is very classical, it's, small town, middle of nowhere, whisked away on an adventure, Evar's is very unique. Evar is trapped in a library, this massive library that spans for miles and miles, and he's trapped in there with 3 others. And the 4 of them got there by going through the machine. And it's not really been explained yet, but each of them somehow got into the machine and then were spat out into this shut-off library. And they're trying to find a way out. It's a really interesting setup because each of the 4 are actually from different times and spent different amount of time in the machine before they were spat out. I know this sounds confusing. I must say I was reading it and it took me a wee while to wrap my head around it because it is quite a complicated setup. And I do think that with Levira's plotline you are eased in a lot slower than you are with Evar's. Evar's you just kind of get dropped in and all this information is speckled over a handful of chapters. However, I'm really enjoying both of them so far. Levira is a really interesting character and Evar has a really interesting setup, so I actually really enjoyed both POVs so far. I've seen a lot of people rating this 5 stars, so I'm really looking forward to getting further into it. It is a bit of a slow start and I have heard other people say that, but it's also quite a chunky book, so a lot of them have slow starts. As for the Rob Hayes book, I am listening to this on audiobook because I really like the performance by Moira Timmins. And this is the sequel to Along the Razor's Edge, which I read last year. And it was one of my favourite reads of the year, so I was very much looking forward to jumping into book 2. And so far it has not disappointed. The magic for me in book 1 was very much Eska as a character. She's such a strong and well-developed character to be in the head of. She's a very complicated character and has a lot of complexities. She's complex and has complexities. Nice, Andrew. If I was nitpicking, I would say the first part of this book we are kind of following Eska around and there doesn't feel like there's an aim, a goal. She does want to, get back at the Empire and kill the Emperor, and that's kind of her, I think that's the overarching story of the series, or at least that's how it's been framed from book 1 and book 2 so far. But in this first section I didn't really feel like we were pointed anywhere. We were just kind of dealing with situations and overcoming them, and then around the midpoint we did get set on a path for the second half of the book that really narrowed in that goal. I also want to say that the world building is not something that's a huge part of book 1, but coming into the middle of this book and then going into the second half, it really is starting to play a big role in the narrative. So that's kind of it. I am planning on finishing this very soon, maybe tonight, if not tomorrow. This, I'm kind of still early days. I've only read about 100 pages. Hoping to get through this at a reasonable pace. It is quite a slow read, just the way it reads is quite slow paced. However, I'm really enjoying it, so... So I finished The Lessons Never Learned by Rob Hayes. It was really good. I really enjoyed it. I think most people will prefer this one to book 1, Along the Razor's Edge. I think, personally, I preferred Along the Razor's Edge that tiny wee bit more. This is a book 2, and I don't want to spoil either this one or book 1, so I'm going to keep this pretty vague to keep it spoiler free. But book 2 picks up immediately after book 1, and we continue with Eska's journey. And Eska is the reason that I loved book 1 so much and book 2. She's such an interesting character to follow, very dark and angsty, and I'm here for it. I love how Rob Hayes writes this book. It is in first person, and it's from the character Eska's future looking back on events. So you do get this extra layer of her being able to talk about, this was a really dumb thing I did. This is the type of book that is prime for taking lines out and little ideas. There's so many little ideas and sayings that would just be perfect to rip out and just stand on itself and say something deep and important about the world and people. I love Eska's arc in this book. It really feels like she progressed as a person and regressed in some areas. The plot was really, really good, but I do think this is where Along the Razor's Edge has an edge. The thing I really loved about Along the Razor's Edge is it really had Eska's drive and her goal, and we knew where she was going. The first half of this book, a lot of things happen and it's really interesting, and there's a lot of character progression, and we visit new places, see new things, and it is really entertaining. It didn't feel like we had an end goal for the book. I wasn't sure where we were going to end up. We had mini end goals, like, oh, we need to do this, that, and the next thing, but I really like having an overarching, this is where we're going. Even if you subvert it later and change track, that's fine, but I really like to have this thing that we're moving towards. It makes it feel like we are progressing in the story, which is something that book 1 I think really did well, whereas the first half of this book we didn't have as clear a final goal. However, when we get to the halfway mark and the plot thickens and we know where we're heading, the second half of this book, terrific. Something that book 1 didn't do that this book did was really lean into the world building and the mythology behind the world. We learn more about the magic system, the sources, and also the other world, as well as some species that we haven't met, like the Rand and the Yin, which are kind of like these god races that are at war with each other. And we leaned into that way more than we did in book 1, and that was awesome. That was really cool, and I really enjoyed learning more about the world. And it tied really closely into Eska's story. I did think after book 1 it was going to be a very personal story to Eska, and this is just going to be, the world's just going to be a backdrop, but I was wrong. This ties very heavily into her story, which is really cool. It's really interesting. So yeah, if you haven't read The War Eternal by Rob Hayes, I highly recommend. So I'm so excited to continue to book 3. I'm not going to leave it as long this time. I do want to jump into book 3 soon. I'm also really excited to jump into Rob Hayes' other work. I kind of want to finish The War Eternal before I start Never Die, so we'll see. Also this week I went to go and see Polyphia live, the band Polyphia. And what's really cool is that Polyphia were actually the band that I listened to while writing my book that's coming out next month, Harbinger of Justice. So as soon as I saw that they were touring nearby, I thought, I have to go. It's a sign. I don't think their music really fits the book, but their music is terrific, so you should definitely check it out. I'm still working on the book that wouldn't burn. I'm still loving it. It's terrific. I've had a really busy week, so I would have liked to have been a wee bit further along with it, but... And it won't help that Zelda Tears of the Kingdom releases today. That's definitely going to take a dent out of my reading time. It's really good. I'm not going to get any reading done. However, sadly, I have got some work tonight that I need to get done, and tomorrow I'm running the EMF 10k, which is a 10k run in Edinburgh near Arthur's Seat, so I need to go to bed at least a reasonable time because I think I have to be up at 6 a.m. So that's fun. So I had a lot of fun at the 10k. It was really, really hot, maybe a little bit too hot, but it was still a lot of fun. I'm pretty happy with the time that I got. I got 48 minutes something, 23, something like that. 48 minutes, 23 seconds. It's a little slower than the last time I did the EMF 10k, which was 47 something. But it is a very hilly route. I've not quite had the same training that I did that time. And really I was just doing it for fun. There is a race at the end of the year that's flat and I'm hoping to get a personal best on that one. But this one was just kind of a do it for the fun. Fun's a strong word when it's that hot, but it was okay, it was pretty good. I've also read a little more of the book that wouldn't burn. I'm over the halfway mark now and I am enjoying it, but the pacing is a little slow. I feel like this middle section is kind of meandering a little bit. I just feel like we're not really getting anywhere with the plot very quickly. Everything seems to take its time. Even just reading a chapter, there are passages where we just start describing this other thing, this side tangent or overly descriptive passages, and it feels like it takes ages for anything to happen. But at the same time, the world, the characters, and the mystery plot are all fantastic. So I really don't know how to feel with this book. It's just a little slow paced for my taste. And I usually don't mind slower books. So if it's a good ending and it's worth this slower middle section, then I'll be happy. So I will check in one more time when I finish the book, but I'm hopeful. And so I finished The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence. And I can confirm this did not spontaneously combust while reading it. Comedy. For some final thoughts. Okay, the ending is brilliant. It's so good. The last 50 odd pages, when everything starts to unravel, get a ton of reveals and lots of things that I should have seen, but I didn't. It's so much fun. And how Mark Lawrence weaves setting, plot, and characters all into one really impressive story. They're so intrinsically woven throughout the narrative, vital to the overall story. Often the setting is just the backdrop for a character's development, or maybe the characters are a wee bit more, swap-outable, substitutionable to get through this type of narrative that the author wanted to create. But in The Book That Wouldn't Burn, every part of it is essential for the story. The mystery and lore of the library and all the world building that's tied to that was so much fun to unravel. Lavera and Avar were terrific characters. I thought they were really good, and their arcs throughout the story a joy to watch. The side characters are just they're there, they're not particularly important, but they're well fleshed out enough that they filled the role that they were playing. I thought Ute was really good. I did really like Ute's character. This is the first book I've read from Mark Lawrence, and I really like his writing style. I know this is very different from his other more grim dark stuff like the Prince of Thorns series, but I'm really intrigued to check that out now that I really enjoyed this. My one big gripe with The Book That Wouldn't Burn is the pacing. I kind of said this in the middle, but I didn't find myself desperate to pick the book up because there was a fair bit of meandering and slower pacing, especially in the middle and the very beginning. And I like slow paced books, but it just felt like we weren't progressing. And even when we were, there was stuff happening. There still seemed to be descriptions and side tangents in a given scene. I was like, I just want to know what happens here. Can we just focus in on this and finish this? Because I want to know what's next. And I do think this book could have been cut back a little bit. It is quite a long book. It's 560 pages, but it reads like it's a lot longer than that. This took me a long time to read, and I don't know if this is just because I read it over a long period of time because I've been pretty busy. Perhaps if you sat down and you're reading this a lot quicker than I did, the pacing wouldn't be as big an issue, but I did find myself not particularly drawn to pick this up. But every time I did, I had a really good time. And like I said, the payoffs at the end of this book were terrific, and I cannot wait for book 2. And this is a really theme-heavy book. There's a lot of ideas that are discussed about knowledge and progression of society, and a bunch of other really big themes that we touched on in this book that was really interesting to read about. And I really like that aspect of it. So I still do recommend it, but just be aware, watch it, the pacing's pretty slow. But it's worth keeping on. But that will do it for today. Thank you very much for watching. Have you read The Book That Wouldn't Burn, or do you plan on picking it up? Let me know in the comments below. Like, subscribe, my raw book. I think that's it. Outro.